Amantla, Amantla, from the river to the sea, from the river to the sea. Amantla, Palestine, Amantla, away to Palestine, away to. Well, good evening, comrades and friends. Salam alaikum, and greetings to all who have spoken already, to, of course, our chairperson and our organizer of this meeting, all the people of this area. I think you mentioned at the beginning that I know this area well and I've come here often. Well, Auntie Farida lived down the road with Comrade Dalla, and it's wonderful to have been close to them and close to this community. And thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's really a privilege. We've had wonderful speeches tonight, and you could see in everyone's presentation and expression the depth of the knowledge and awareness. And young Arab who was speaking about his father now, who we've all met coming to this country, how he has, from a young age, how he has developed and grown, and that commitment and clarity. And that's what we find, of course, in the Palestinian people and all those involved in a just struggle throughout the world, of course, including in our country. In terms of what we see here, this message, 44,000 killed to date. I'm not going to dwell on something we're all aware of, the bleakness and the grimness of what Zionist Israel and its sponsors have done, this butchery, this genocide. 44,000 is actually not the right figure, because both Lancet magazine, in a very important report just a few months ago, and now from Brown University in the USA, very important statistics are being recorded, which actually, in terms of Lancet, they say the figure is more likely 180,000 dead. We know when we talk about 44,000, there's always the figure of 10,000 buried under the rubble. There's also something like another 20,000 kids unaccounted for. So the records actually have been destroyed, and the Gaza Health Authority was keeping absolutely accurate figures. The Israelis have destroyed much of that now. And these assessments from two different sources are really something to take into account. So it's on a massive scale, and not to mention the 150,000 who have been dreadfully maimed, including young children. And there's a figure of 1,000 children who are amputees. And it's said that this is a world record for a conflict of this duration, this particular year. It's absolutely so shocking. And, you know, if you take this figure of 44,000, you can work it out yourselves. I did some arithmetic the other day. And when you know that 69 of our people were murdered at Sharpeville, if you play around with the figures, that's something like 2.5 Sharpevilles. 2.5 Sharpevilles have been committed every day in this period of time. 2.5 Sharpevilles. Sharpeville, killing 69 and wounding 200, shocked the world, and even affected these Western governments who came out in condemnation. That was including British government and those in Europe and the American press and the media all over the Western world. One Sharpeville massacre. And what's happening now is the most barbaric killing of civilians, children, women, since 1945. Of course, you've got peaks in that period from the USA, from Britain and France, the former colonial powers, where if you look at Vietnam, 3 million, 4 million people, Algeria, 1 million people killed in that period of struggle. But we South Africans know what Sharpeville did. It was this absolute watershed in our country. And it created, apart from resistance in our country and the armed struggle, the move to the armed struggle, it began to create a worldwide anti-apartheid movement, which Comrade Naledi Pandor spoke about. But it's absolutely mind-boggling in terms of what is humanity, that in 1960, 21st of March, 69 are killed and 200 wounded. And you would expect there's this kind of view that humanity will always progress. And where we've got today is the regression into the most unspeakable brutality. Tonight, I'm going to move in terms of resistance, and I'm going to attempt to show you that we should not be pessimistic, that there's hope and even optimism, and not just an article of faith. And I'm not talking about religion there when I say that, just the idea that no, they'll win in the end. Because what I'm hoping to do here, and I'm hoping all of us will do, is there is too much, and it's understandable, it's absolutely understandable in our country and internationally, of people looking at the horrors of the TV screens night after night and seeing what these butchers are doing and have been doing, and what they're now doing in Lebanon, and what they're now hoping to do in the whole region in terms of bringing Iran into the conflict as a way of saving Netanyahu and his gang. And this particular bleakness and grimness is something we've got to show our people, that it's struggle, there's a huge price to pay, but that in terms of resistance, struggling against occupation and repression, that resistance will grow even when it's hit hard, like it has been recently with the martyrs who have been taken. And that's a heavy, heavy blow. But what struggle shows, from South Africa to the Cuban struggle against Batista, to the struggle in Vietnam, these struggles have shown that with colonial imperialist oppression, the resistance finds a way, even at the darkest of times, to reorganize, to get stronger, to learn from the experience and supersede the power and the resources of these mighty imperialist forces. You know, a guy called Karl Marx, who loved to grow beards, he would be looked on today as some terrorist. You know how they have this Islamophobia of people with beards. Karl Marx studied struggle, resistance, the wheel of history, from social system to social system, and became very practically involved with the Communist International of that century in organizing. And he made a very profound observation, which Lenin, by the way, takes up further. And it's basically this, that in terms of the struggle of humanity against the odds, against ruling powers, tyranny, colonialism, and so on, that the people finding methods and ways to organize stand up, and they strike blows for freedom and dignity. And in the process, the repressors hit back with great anger. From these blows, and sometimes tremendous setbacks, the revolutionaries learned lessons about how to organize better and more skilled. And he talks about this cyclical aspect of resistance learning from repression, and then the repressors upping the odds with their savagery and repression. So it's blow and counter blow. And in the process, resistance of the people gets more and more skilled until we can overcome the oppressors. When we look at the martyrs here who we're paying tribute to today, this is their life, this was their life, and they live in spirit. And death is something that they don't fear. And we saw it in our streets and our struggle. As Joe Slovo always used to say, that our people were showing contempt for death, and the young people as well, as the struggle intensified. And you really see this with the Palestinians. You see it with Hezbollah. We're seeing it with the Houthis, who even mighty America can't defeat the small people, the small group. So the power of resistance, because it's a just cause, the moral high ground, and the leaders are serving the people, and the people arise against their repression. So resistance is the way forward, and in very many different methods. In times where there are possibilities to use democratic openings or partial openings, people use peaceful methods, because the revolutionaries, those who resist, don't want bloodshed. In fact, there's the turn to armed resistance, as we had in South Africa after Sharpeville, that the only possibility, as Madiba and the leadership showed, because it's never just one person, it's a collective, that there was no longer a possibility in our country to rely on peaceful methods alone, and that's why we took up arms. This is the case with the people in the Middle East. It's the case with the Palestinian people. And if we're talking about history, which is such an important teacher, in 1935, the leader of Palestinian resistance was Sheikh al-Qasim, which is why today, all these years, nearly 100 years later, you have the al-Qasim brigades and al-Qasim rockets. And if you read about al-Qasim, he's one of these people here, these leaders. And the British assassinated him. He was organizing armed struggle against British rule, and they already were seeing how this was paving the way, given the Balfour Declaration, of not just allowing, which the Arab people, Muslim people were prepared to accept Jewish people and live together. There's the It's known as the Golden Age in the Middle East and North Africa of Islamic and Jewish interaction and living together. And they murdered him in battle because he was such a threat. What that did was it sparked what was called the Great Arab Revolt, and it lasted from 1936. It was sparked by the killing of Qasim, and the militants rose up. There was strikes throughout Mandate Palestine. The people rose up, and it started with massive strikes and then turned into an incredible armed uprising in which a lot of British and Zionist militia were killed, but thousands of more on the side of the Palestinian people. It lasted until 1939. 1936 to 39. Read it. It's so interesting to see the Palestinian people, how advanced they were in their resistance. It's actually one of the reasons why, when the Zionists went onto the attack after Second World War, and so many poured in, and they started in 1947, not 1948, the Nakba, the catastrophe, reign of terror, the ethnic cleansing, the killing of Palestinian people. The Palestinian people had lost a lot of the leaders in that previous period, and it took time before others emerged. And we saw this with the emergence of the Palestine Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat. And that was now on the increase, and then battered back. And then we now came to this new period. And the point about all of what I'm saying, which people need to understand beyond this meeting place, beyond the organizations of the liberation movement here, is that in international law, resistance and armed resistance against occupation is legal. It's not terrorism. What is terrorism and against international law is when the occupation force uses these methods against the people who are occupied. And we've got to get that right, and we've got to make sure the people in this country understand that, because a lot of our media are still projecting the Western narrative, and we've got to fight for the correct narrative. We're winning that, and that's being won internationally as well, because people globally are up in arms in terms of this absolute genocide that's taken place. And we can also see that Jewish people like Melanie over here, but particularly in the USA, how they are joining the uprising of humanity against Zionist Israel and against its sponsors in these Western countries. I saw something the other day in terms of a survey of Jewish people in the States. And it's quite amazing that Jews under the age of 35, 60% of them are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and for Palestine. The figure of the past, those older Jews, my age, people over 60, 70, and like me, over 80, 7%, only 7%. So see the incredible change that's taken place, and that's happening globally. So I've got 5 minutes. Okay. So the last 2 points I'll deal with very quickly. We are winning, the Palestinian people are winning. Zionist Israel can hit hard, as we've seen. It's tactical. In the strategic sense, they can't win. And the Palestinian people, with the determination and the samud and the resistance, they can. The Zionists, the Israeli fascist government now cannot carry on a protracted war. Never mind in Gaza, where they failed. Netanyahu said that he would get the hostages freed and he would crush Hamas. That's not happened. In relation to Israel itself, there's such economic problems taking place. The Israeli economy is dire straits. The settlers from the north and the south, those are empty towns. This is why they've attacked Lebanon. One of the reasons, in order to create a buffer zone and let 60 to 80,000 of these settlers who are living in Tel Aviv hotels, and the government has to pay the bill to get back into those areas. So what happened on the 7th of October, as Sinwar had seen, is that unless the Palestinians did something very, very dramatic, the situation was going to be lost quite a degree in terms of Israel and Saudi Arabia coming together. This, you saw Netanyahu in the United Nations in September, before the Al-Aqsa flood, showing his map of the Middle East without Palestine, and this route from the East coming through Palestine into Europe. This is why the USA and the Western countries are wanting to see the Palestinians smashed, and why particularly in Gaza, first of all, and bear in mind the oil and the gas fields which Israel is looking to control, which are offshore from Gaza and from Lebanon. But the cat amongst the pigeons, the situation has got out of control, which is why they become so vicious. And what we're seeing now is basically the 4 pillars in action. Our 4 pillars, and we've been discussing this. I discussed it with the Palestinian leaders in Damascus and Hania himself in Gaza when I was there. And they were so interested to understand how we had achieved our freedom. The people in struggle is your power. The armed struggle reinforces the overall struggle. The underground network assists the resistance. We've seen this. And then number 4 is international solidarity. Very powerful. So ending on that point about what we can do. What we can do is what Comrade Naledi Pandor was saying, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. Boycott is the consumers, the people boycotting Israeli products, and we must start movement towards boycotting American, USA, Germany, the way it's giving such support. It's absolutely disgraceful. Divestment. Divestment is churches, religious groups, trade union groups, universities who invest their funds for return. And much of those funds go into places, as it once happened, business in South Africa, business in Israel. So the pressure on civil society institutions and corporates and so on not to invest, that divestment, the sanctions issue. Who can impose sanctions on Israel? It's governments. Sanctions are in the hands of governments, as happened with us when we were able to get through United Nations sanctions against South African business, trade, all these things. Coal, they need our coal, for instance. You know about that. And the question of arms and weapons. And what I'm saying at the end now, in response to Comrade Naledi, is we've got to build a huge campaign, much, much greater, and apply pressure on our government to do much more. No coal to Israel, no coal from our coal fields, this question of breaking totally with Israel. And the comrades here in Cape Town, the PFC, are moving a bill through Parliament, bill that would talk about an anti-apartheid movement in our country, but where our government goes the full force, and that's to totally break all forms of interaction with Israel. So the final point on this, and it's a sentence, when South Africa takes action, okay, people will say, no coal from South Africa, Israel will get. Others will say, well, Israel will go and get coal elsewhere. Yeah, it will. But if South Africa acts like Colombia has acted, the world really takes note, and the moral voice and strength of South Africa. So we've got to get into the BDS challenges and up our work in this regard. On this basis, we will win. We can win. The Palestinians will win sooner or later. The more we mobilize, the more this fourth pillar, international solidarity, gets organized, the stronger the pressure, the isolation on Zionist Israel, and the isolation, the pressure on Germany, on Britain, on France, on the USA. That will make a huge difference, and that then will help the Palestinians no end. It will give them such incredible inspiration and encouragement. So this is what we've got to get through to our people, especially those who are in despair over the massacres they see. We must say to them, you want to stop that. These are the things that we can do. Thank you very much indeed.